Hey, Jean. Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you so much for being, here. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm so happy that people could figure, thank you to, oh, hey, Roselle. All right, DJ's here. Thank you so much for everybody that was not necessarily used to Zoom. This is going to be a very interesting day. The Bayard Rustin Symposium has always been about participants, about interaction and participation. And we are going to be doing our absolute everything we can to keep that going. The chat is open. I encourage people to engage back and forth, raise your hand to enter the conversation, to comment. We're going to be doing all we can to keep that in. Zoom has also made it possible to have people in from out of town, which is wonderful. My biological relatives. I'm very happy to have my brother and my father here. Everybody that's not from Vallejo, I want to give you a very special welcome. The Bayard Rustin Symposium began in 2018. There was another in 2019. This is the third. I took last year off. So let me give you a little bit more background. My name's Anna Bergman, and I began the Bayard Rustin Symposium because I saw that there was a tremendous amount of interest and inspiration about Bayard Rustin throughout the country and throughout the world. There's the Rustin Lord breakfast that has been going on for many years. There's been creative works about Bayard. There's been musicals and theater. There's the Bayard Rustin Coalition that has been extremely active. I believe that a lot of people know who Bayard Rustin was, and as I said, are inspired by him. And it was a matter of putting a lot of those projects together. It is said sometimes that Bayard Rustin was in the background. I don't believe that. I think the problem is that African-American history has been put in the background. When I learned about Bayard 15 years ago or so, I was running around talking about how I did not know who this wonderful man was because he was gay. I didn't know who he was because I didn't know anything about African-American history. So when you say that somebody isn't well known, that is in the eye of the beholder. That depends on who is saying what about whom. So we're going to be looking at how history is passed down, how history is discussed, and how people are remembered. There's reasons that Bayard Rustin isn't as well known. One of them is because he was an organizer. He was a strategist. A lot of what Bayard Rustin did was meet with people, was teach. He inspired a tremendous amount of people who are prominent now. That was personal engagement. That is something that you do not necessarily see in public. Okay, welcome Pastor Quick. We're going to be hearing from Pastor Quick shortly. And Pastor, I was putting forward my belief that Bayard, the reason when it said that Bayard Rustin was in the background, the truth is that Black history has been placed in the background. When you start to read more about history, you hear plenty about him. So I'm gonna give a little bit of background. Bayard Rustin was born in 1912 in Pennsylvania. The primary person in Bayard Rustin's life was his grandmother, Julia Rustin, who founded the NAAC. She was a nurse who founded the NAACP chapter in their town. Bayard was out from the time he was a child. When he spoke to his grandmother and said that he enjoyed spending time with other boys, and she said, "Well, I suppose that's how you are." And she said, Grandma said, "In selecting your male friends, you should be careful that you associate with people who have as much to lose as you have. People who do not have as much to lose as you have can be very dangerous," which was very good advice from Grandma, which Bayard did not always follow. He was a musician and athlete from the time he was very young. He was challenging segregated seating in his town. Bayard went to college and did not graduate. And one of the reasons for the Bayard Rustin Symposium is to center his legacy somewhere, because Bayard Rustin's archives are housed at the Library of Congress. I think if he had gone to a university, there may have been a Bayard Rustin Center. So he went to New York City, was extremely social and active, was a member of the Young Communist League. And as many people were in that time, in the 30s, there were people, the Communist Party was making a pretense of involvement in civil rights. So that haunted many principled people were involved with the party at that time, and it haunted them for the rest of their lives. Bayard Rustin and others very quickly learned that the Communist Party did not care about civil rights and left it. After his grandmother, the most important relationship to Bayard Rustin was A. Philip Randolph, a great hero. Another reason that it is incorrect to say that Bayard Rustin is not well known because he's gay. I mean, when other gay white people say that to me, I'll say, okay, well, come back and tell me about 5 civil rights leaders who weren't named X, King, or Parks. While W.E.B. Du Bois, William Monroe Trotter, and A. Philip Randolph, to say nothing of the vast contributions of African-American women, are not well known, we need to not blame that on Bayard Rustin being gay. And I place the blame a lot. And I believe that the African-American community and families have been maligned, that assumptions have been made about the African-American community that are not necessarily correct. And that the language we use to talk about somebody being gay in this day and age should not be applied to the past. In an era where people spoke less to each other about a lot of things, family members, aunties, uncles that were included in family gatherings loved I don't think that it should not be, that needs to not be discounted. If you say somebody is closeted, you're calling them a liar. You're saying that I'm saying that how I define somebody, whether I heard about something, is defining who they are. Because relatives do not share everything does not mean that they aren't who they are, and that their lives were not rich and meaningful. I'm an archivist. One of my great interests is finding the records of people. The wealthy and powerful are more likely to leave documentation of their lives, because people with more to lose, as Grandma Rustin would have said, did not leave documentation of their lives, does not mean that they weren't living their lives. In 1953, Bayard Rustin was busted for a sex offense, and while he was working for the Fellowship for Reconciliation, which the director of that was A.J. Musty, who was another father figure to Bayard, but not like a Philip Randolph was. Musty had been remonstrating with Bayard about his sexual experiences and behaviors. Bayard was a brilliant asset to whatever organization he was in. We know that there were many people in positions of power who were gay and were not bothered, including J. Edgar Hoover. He lived with a man for his entire life, managed to persecute other gay men and women, and no one went after him. I definitely consider J. Edgar Hoover to be a closet case and a malicious one. He was a racist. It is also said that he may have been passing. So, okay, here we have A.J. Musty attempting to police the sexuality of an African-American man. It was said that he had given Bayard warnings. After Bayard was picked up for this sexual offense, A.J. Musty chose to announce that to the entire country, claiming that it would have been done anyway. That's not true. There was no Twitter back then. They could have brushed it off. They could have covered it up like so many other things have been covered. After completing his jail sentence and being welcomed home from that by Grandma, Bayard was forced to resign from the Fellowship for Reconciliation, where he had worked for 12 years. He did not get any severance. The fellowship was supposed to pay for psychiatry and did not, after Bayard's psychiatrist transferred him to a clinic so that he could continue his treatment. And Bayard Rustin allowed the psychiatrist to speak about him because he wanted to give support to other people. So Dr. A said, it was as if A.J. Musty and certain officers in the Fellowship of Reconciliation had said, well, Bayard can get a job moving furniture. I think they were saying, in effect, he's male and he's Black, so why can't he go out and shine shoes? That's the way it sounded to me. In the 1980s, this is from Bill Sutherland, Bayard and I were in Zimbabwe observing the elections. We had breakfast together one morning. He cried when he remembered how A.J. Musty had abandoned him in 1953. Bayard said he went hungry and would never again allow himself to be in such a situation. That is Bill Sutherland, a devoted friend to Bayard Rustin for his entire life. This is a letter written to him about whether Bayard would be attending the independence celebrations for Ghana, which is, dear Bayard, I just received your letter today. What a bitter disappointment to me to hear that you are not coming. What the hell happened? Your letter sounds like you are frozen up inside. Is it the same old story of your past? Who gave you the axe this time? Is there anything I can do from this end? I hope it didn't have anything to do with your not having an official invitation, but these are scarce as hen's teeth. I'm willing, however, to go down on my knees in the official circles in an old school try, even though I don't think it would do much good. The heroic familial love story of Bayard Rustin's life was A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph never put Bayard aside, always stood by him. Randolph had a lot more to lose than A.J. Musty did. When you look at these pictures, this was a true father and son relationship. You see love, tenderness, rapport. I researched connections between Bayard Rustin and Ralph Bunche. When people died, Randolph and Rustin would send telegrams. That's what they did back in those days. I think sending a telegram instead of a letter was the equivalent today of making a phone call instead of a text message. It had this immediacy, a family. This was not a formal Mr. Randolph and I. It was personal letters, sort of the way you do now. When you're sending like a get well card, you'll sign it from two people. And here is Rustin and Randolph at one of the many events that they attended together, with Rustin holding the umbrella over his head. Rustin said that Mr. Randolph was a gentleman and never asked about his personal life. That is, okay, so by no means would that mean that Bayard Rustin was not out to A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was a true hero. Okay, here's 1963. There was so much pressure on Dr. King about my being gay, and particularly because I would not deny it, that he set up a committee to explore whether it would be dangerous for me to continue working with him. If Martin had taken the strong stand that he took a year later in 1963, when people tried to get Rustin out of the March on Washington, all the Black leaders supported him. He could have overcome it and kept me, but I understood his doing it, and I hold no grief with him about doing it. I just wish that he had shown the strength in 62 that he showed when he backed me completely in 63. But he was a year older and had another year's experience. That's real different from how he was speaking about A.J. Musty. And another person that comes up is Stanley Levinson, a wealthy white Jewish man who was involved with the civil rights movement. Levinson was genuinely a communist. Here is a passage. The betrayal comes from Stanley Levinson. That's the person who hurt him the most. Stanley had been Bayard's buddy. They had dinner together and strategy sessions all the time. Levinson didn't do anything to defend Bayard. He went with King and they cut Bayard off. Financial backing all disappeared overnight. When King detached from Rustin, they had a younger, Bayard was a mentor to him. And so it was perhaps a younger brother branching off from an older brother. Bayard was not employed by King. He did not lose his livelihood. He was extremely active. He continued doing the many things he did. Another reason that Bayard may not be as well known as we would like was because he did a lot of work in Africa. He was involved in Ghanaian independence, in Zambia, in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. He did a lot of work in South Africa. He was well known in England. Bayard loved to travel. I think if it had not been for A. Philip Randolph, Bayard may very well have stayed overseas for his life. Except when I have been attacked, the Black community has seldom seen fit to even mention the gay aspect. When I have been attacked, I have usually been defended by the Black community. Okay, now here's letters from Donald Rumsfeld. Bayard was extremely well known and prominent. I can't find this here, but he was on a first name basis with Senator Ted Kennedy. There's a 3-page letter to Bayard from Kennedy wanting his opinions. So in closing, I want to say that I think Miss Daniels, okay, let me just figure out how to end this slideshow here. Okay, sorry. I think the life of Bayard Rustin is a success story with a lot of love and regard. Bayard was driving around with Hubert Humphrey in 1964. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, he was called to the White House by LBJ, who was sobbing at the assassination. And so we need to look at who are our heroes, and to just dedicate this a little bit to my father. What I've always heard from him is there's very few bad guys and good guys, which is how I try and run my life. The Bayard Rustin Symposium isn't about Bayard Rustin. It's always been my belief that if he came in and saw people sitting around talking about him, he would say to, stop and to get to work. This is active and moving ahead. And so one of the things that I'm asking myself and trying to figure out is, what would Bayard Rustin do in a situation, and what kept him going? And the role of faith in Bayard Rustin's life was immeasurable. He was jailed and beaten up many times, and in the face of all of that, he said he believed in Jesus. And in this era, there can be discomfort with speaking about faith. There is discomfort and there is hurt. There's people that have been hurt by the church. We need to figure some of that out. And, this is not about, certainly from my perspective, trying to get people to go to church. That's just not how I would look at things. But we need to look at the church. We need to learn from the church, and figure. I have invited Reverend Dr. Dante Quick to speak to us today. Pastor Quick is a graduate of Morehouse College and Princeton and UC Berkeley. He served in the offices of Mayor Marion Barry, Congressman John Lewis, and Governor Zell Miller. He has a PhD in philosophical and systematic theology in the Graduate Theological Union. Pastor Quick has produced many political events and opportunities for education and involvement. He's deeply involved in the Vallejo community with issues of police brutality, domestic violence. Pastor Quick is very engaged with youth and throughout the world. And I've learned, you could say in the street, in the pulpit, and on TikTok. I am just very delighted and honored that Reverend Dr. Dante Quick is speaking to us today. So Pastor Quick.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. I hope that my meager contributions will be helpful to someone who is attempting to understand the nexus of Rustin to the African-American conversation. And I say conversation and not simply to faith, because we have to sort of examine the binary that has been set up between sacred and secular in African-American culture. A binary that has become a much more exaggerated in the most immediate historical period, known as Black Lives Matter. And so I'll address some of that. I want to thank Anna for bringing this collective together and having this courageous conversation. I am not going to take a half an hour. I'll open up, I believe, for questions, because I think I want to have a very nuanced conversation. And that nuanced conversation is going to take us through several tributaries down the river of Rustin. If I were to entitle the conversation that I want to have with you all today, it would be Conjuring the Crisis of the White Consciousness. And conjuring is a notion that I have been working with in my PhD work, and I'm actually doing some writing on this notion of conjuring. The word has negative connotations within the Western philosophical and religious tradition. It has taken on the meaning of negative religious practices through the Tarzan movies of the African witch doctor. Conjuring has been made to be something that is outside of orthodox Western traditions. And yet, theologically, the notion of conjuring is simply any ritual or process done on the human behalf to attempt to reach and engage the divine and the power therein. We all conjure when we pray. And yet this sort of negative connotation that is connected to Santeria and other religious traditions, mainly out of Central America, is based upon really Western notions of white supremacy and dominance. Today, as we speak, I am going to suggest that Rustin and many in the African-American tradition, people of color in general throughout the diaspora, have collided with the white consciousness in America today and have created a crisis of that consciousness. That crisis is seen in phrases such as "Make America Great Again." That consciousness is seen in the attack on Asian Americans. That crisis is reached a zenith in our recent history in the attack on the US Capitol. Now listen to the religious language that is used to talk about the Capitol. The mighty pulpit of democracy. The center, the religious center of democratic principles, couched within the language of the modern media. This citadel of democracy, built literally by the hands of slaves, was attacked by a predominant white male audience, seeking to reclaim it for their hetero patriarchal white supremacist doctrines. This, I think, my brothers and sisters, is the crisis that the white consciousness is facing today. It began to overflow in the election of Barack Obama, but its roots have been since the very first African was brought on a ship from the west coast of Africa. Now, the religious connotations, I do not think we can understand them fully until we understand that this crisis is based in history, and its history must be understood and work our way up to Bayard Rustin. I want to start with offering you a thought by Niccolo Machiavelli. In his 1531, The Prince, Machiavelli said, "Men do harm either because they fear you or because they hate you." Machiavelli in The Prince lays out this very concise, well thought out notion of power to his young prince. And yet he understands and laces this notion of power with the notion of fear. And for him, fear is that which drives and motivates people. It is the consistent and constant understanding of how men and women operate in the Western society. And I say men and women consciously because once we make our way up to modern history, we have cloistered white consciousness to white men. That's a mistake. White women are also suffering from the crisis of Western whiteness. And we see this in the fact that Donald Trump became president not just because of white men, but the overwhelming vote of white women. And as we talk about Rustin, we're going to talk about the danger of the white liberal and how the white liberal is often complicit in the maintenance of white consciousness and white superiority. Because Rustin's going to help us to understand his deep suspicion of the white liberal comes out in his understanding and power dynamics. And all of this, you may be asking, how does this come into conversation with religion? Religion is a fundamental push for power. And African-American religion is revolutionary in its orientation because it's an attempt to regain ontological power, that is the being and presence of Blackness that has been robbed through the religious impulse. Slavery was sanctioned by the Pope. Slaves boarded ships from West Africa called Peter, Paul, and Jesus. Slavery was sanctioned in America as an opportunity for the white Christian world to save the souls of the Blackness of Africans. And so we're going to have to understand you cannot talk about Black religion and not talk about the political, because Black religion was born out of the push, the fight, the tug to gain access for Black peoples to basic humanity and the rights therein of humanity. So when we go to Machiavelli, Machiavelli helps us to understand that much of the Western formation of society is rooted and grounded in fear. And the fear of white supremacy has been tossed on cultures all across the world. And escaping that fear and the co-opting of that fear is indeed a part of the Black experience. Secondly, I turn to a notion of fear as presented by Howard Thurman, the mystic, philosopher, theologian, and also Gandhian. He says fear is one of the persistent hounds of hell that dog the footsteps of the poor, dispossessed, and disinherited. So for a good part of this conversation, I am going to take us through a genealogy. Now that genealogy is a word that I'm taking from Foucault, a French existentialist philosopher. Foucault was a philosopher of power and sexuality. And what better human being to bring into a philosophical conversation about Rustin than Foucault? Foucault helps us to understand that religion, sexuality, and power are all intertwined and all play a major role in how we understand the operations of the world and the cultures in which we find ourselves. So the three figures we will talk about today, Rustin, Thurman, and Foucault. And I hope they help us to start to have a broader conversation. Sister Anna began part of that conversation by explaining some of the intricacies of Rustin within the civil rights movement. I will explore that a little more in a bit more detail around a number of things. But first, I want to start with history, because that's where we have to ground anything and anyone that we're talking about. We all bring a history to the table. We all bring an understanding of history. We're all shaped and formed by history while we simultaneously shape and form history. If we don't understand the role history plays in our formation and the role we play in the formation of history, then we've already started to have a conversation that is not real and grounded in a certain reality around our interactions with each other. And the one who constructs history has power. For Howard Zinn helps us to understand that history has a politics. And the politics of history play a role in how we see ourselves, how others see us, and how we form and shape the future. He argues in his Politics of History that much of historical study has attempted to ignore the politics of history because the dominant forces are shaping them. And in shaping the politics of history and trying to convince us to ignore them, we accept narratives as dominant, as accurate, as truth, without questioning those narratives and the motivation behind which those narratives are created. Now, Sister Anna, I believe, has given us history. A large portion has been documented by John D'Amelio. And when we read D'Amelio, we have to understand that D'Amelio is writing a historiography that is intentionally weaving and trying to understand Rustin through the lens of his sexuality. Now, there is an understanding of that history that must be taken through there. But we also have to understand that when you shape and color history through anything, it will give you a certain perspective. So if I shape him through sexuality, is it the same as shaping him through Blackness? And is it the same as shaping him through religion? No, they are not the same. They all have a different starting point. They all have a different political axis. They all have a different goal. It's by acknowledging that, by understanding the political implications of how we want to view any individual and how we shape their history, that we are truly honest about the endeavor, and therefore we can have a truly honest conversation about the person. By trying to hide our political motivations, we are in effect lying about what those motivations ends are, and therefore cannot create a shaped and honest dialogue with the individuals we are conversing with. I am a fan of D'Amelio's version. I've read other versions. I will filter all of those versions for this conversation, yes, through the lens of Black theology, which will help us then get to some of the political understandings of who Rustin is, that I think is very important. But as I've argued, we can't get there without placing him first in history. And for that, I turn to Foucault. Foucault developed the historical construct of knowledge and power. He is against what he calls totalitarian theories. Those are large meta theories that package everything neatly into an understanding narrative. He is going to be against things like Marxism or psychoanalysis or any totalizing and unifying theory. He wants to argue that his theory, called genealogy, is running against this notion that everything makes sense, that everything is neatly packed and tight, and moves towards what he calls a totalizing criticism. In other words, Foucault wants to develop a theory that breaks up the larger narrative of power and history and knowledge and breaks it down into what I call folk knowledge, a decentralized, autonomous, and local form of understanding the way knowledge operates. This local criticism is what Foucault would call the insurrection of subjugated knowledges, or what African-American scholars like Charles Long have called opaque knowledge. That is, within Western culture has done an amazing job of hiding the knowledges of subjugated people under the totalizing knowledge of the white male patriarchal gaze. Therefore, Black people, Black religion, Black philosophy is seen through the eyes of the Western gaze, and therefore has no authentic presence of its own. How do we understand a person's life when we have not heard from the person, him or herself? Does the person want to be seen as gay or as Black or as male? How does the individual, him or herself, want to be understood from a first person perspective? And can that person be understood without understanding the culture, the people, the environment that shaped them in their immediate construct? I live in California, but am I Californian? And do I really live in California, or do I live in Vallejo? And is Vallejo the same California as San Francisco? And is that the same California as San Diego? Is it the same California as the San Fernando Valley? Do I live in the California of Reagan and Nixon? You see, when we start to ask these questions from a Foucaultian point of view, it becomes much more complex, much more nuanced. The sort of pigeonholing that is the Western notion becomes dangerous and becomes illegitimate forms of knowledge that need to be subjugated from the totalizing notions that we hold and go down into the resources of the personal, the individual, the connectional. So that beyond the autobiography, how accurate is any narrative of us? And in the world of Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, where others can write one or two sentences about us and it becomes fact, what can we know about any individual in a culture in which we don't even take the time to converse with that individual? Here in Vallejo, it may surprise some people that I am even in this group. There is an African-American female activist who's for years tried to argue that I am the most anti-gay pastor that she has ever met, and yet has never had a conversation with me. But the notions of power and the attempt to manipulate power would have us define and pigeonhole people to take our own political interest and use those interests to tear down other people by creating a totalizing history. Rustin stands against that. And whenever you read his writings, his own writings, you read a man who is very nuanced. You meet a man who's very aware of his own agendas, take those agendas into account, and references people for who they are and where they are within their intrinsic interactions with him. And that is a deeply self-aware point of view. When you read of him, and he is complex. He is very complex. He is a human being. He has sometimes difficult relationships with some of the men he's been involved with. Sometimes toxic relationships. There's sometimes been cultures of violence around them. But name me any character in history who has done anything recorded of significance that does not have a complicated background, who does not display the flaws of humanity, and who does not engage in behavior that others can deem right or wrong, good or bad. Those are moral judgments, not ethical judgments. And there is a difference between ethics and morality. And so to finish off Foucault wants us to understand in what he called native knowledges, that there are some native knowledges that are located at the bottom of hierarchies, at the bottom of class dimensions, and that unless one understands these natives, or remember what I'm calling folk knowledges, which are regional, cultural, they're differentiated from the unanimity that one owes or one attempts to impose. These are knowledges that spring up from the bottom, out of experience, not from the top of scholarly view. They are based on material history. What exactly happened in that moment? Who was there that can contrive it? And what political leanings do they even bring? And so we, in taking a Foucaultian view, understand that there is great power in the ability to tell the story. And the power in the ability to tell the story shapes the narrative. As a Christian, my question comes, how do the Egyptians understand what happened with Moses? What would happen if we read a version of the Bible written by the Canaanites or the Perizzites? The version of the Bible we are reading comes from the Israelite community. They are describing their enemies. They are describing their battles. They are describing the land that God told them they were to take from other communities. Our history of Scripture is a history deeply bound within the Jewish community. And critical exegetical analysis would have us to ask the question, what are the people they took the land from? What did their gods tell them? And how different would the story be if they had won the wars? We hear about the battle of David and Goliath from David. Wonder what Goliath's thought was. Was Goliath trying to protect his children? We'll never know because we're not reading the version from Goliath's point of view. We're reading the version from David and his ancestors' point of view. And that's very important to understand from a critical perspective. Does it separate us from our faith? I'm going to get up Sunday morning and preach about it. But secure faith is never afraid of asking critical questions, because secure faith is grounded in something much deeper than the meta narrative. It is grounded in relationship, not religion. And this comes to the heart of Rustin. He was not a religionist, though he inherited a grand religious tradition. And I will spend just a few moments now that I have sort of tried to demystify this notion of history and how I am going to exegete a bit of his life, not all, but just a bit. Rustin is deeply incorporated into the church. 3 churches, 3 religious traditions. The Baptist tradition, out of which his grandfather and his lineage has roots. Quakerism, out of which his great-grandfather, in the Baptist tradition, his Quaker roots, out of which his grandmother has strong religious traditions. And the Black educational tradition, primarily the AME Church. And I want to suggest that all of these elements come into play, and that all of these elements have a role in playing and developing him. I start with the Black educational tradition, because there we find the collision of the AME Church and the Quaker tradition. We find those in his education at Wilberforce in Ohio, and in his education at Cheyney State Teachers College. Wilberforce, founded by the AME Church, was an attempt to educate ex-slaves, an attempt to bring the Enlightenment onto those who were formerly enslaved. And I use the word enlightenment very carefully, because early educational, and even now our modern educational system, is based upon the Western Enlightenment tradition, modernity. Modernity is Europe's imposition of its meta-narrative on the rest of the world. Modernity is the white male gaze that is put on ships and imported to every level of the planet. Now, the ultimate understanding of modernity and history finds itself in a man by the name of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel, in his lectures of 1920, I believe 1922 and 1930, on the philosophy of history, gives us great insight into how modernity operates. Hegel and his philosophy of history was published posthumously in 1837, but this is what he says: Africa proper, as far as history goes back, has remained for all purposes of connection with the rest of the world shut up. It is the gold land compressed within itself, the land of childhood, which lying beyond the day of self-conscious history is enveloped in the dark mantle of night. What Hegel is saying is that Africa and its peoples have no history. They lie outside of history. And since Hegel's words, Black people, Africans in the diaspora, have largely been trying to figure out how to insert themselves into Western history, how to become legitimate players in the Western discourse, how to get the American dream, how to be certified and acknowledged. This is at the root of early ex-slave education. This is at the heart of the Du Bois Booker T. Washington battle. How do we become acceptable, credible agents within the culture of white supremacy. And the reason that Rustin did not finish both schools, I would argue, points to his long and ambivalent history with his Blackness, his gayness, and the culture in which he spends his life trying to free. His radical sense of self and independence was really his problem. Not the fact that he was gay, not the fact that he was Black, but his sense that he almost, with a certain flamboyance, refused to be put into any box. And within the Western construct, you got to fit into a box. All Black preachers are this. All Black women are angry. All Black men have babies they don't take care of. We like to put people into boxes. We like to minimize them within the meta-narratives of Western historical thought. And then on occasions, there are men and women who utterly refuse to be contained in the preconceived notions that one brings. Here is a young African-American male who loved classical music. He was a scholar and a star athlete. And yet, he had a penchant for his best friends and his larger amount of his community to be white. He was not socially at home within Black communities. He had a great chameleon ability to move from spaces and through spaces, and yet very few of those spaces accepted him. Many of those spaces wanted to use him for his gifts, but his complicated personality was not conformist at all. He was a behind-the-scenes star of the movement who never wanted to be acknowledged as a star. Indeed, early in his life, he made a commitment that he wanted greatness to be lived, not talked about. Just a word on the AME Church, founded by Richard Allen, a protest church, a church whose religious roots were aimed in saying, my personhood matters, my God has ordained it, I am fully capable of worshiping on my own without you having to determine who I am or what I am. There is a radicalism when people take their agency and their religion and use that to build upon it within the larger world. Now, another word, a word on being a Quaker. The English Civil War of the 17th century, 1742 to around 1752-51, found an upheaval in Christianity. And there were groups called seekers or searchers. And out of that came a young man named George Fox. And Fox did not really feel all of the teachings of the Church of England. He had a revelation that I don't need a church, that Christ Jesus can speak to anyone on his own terms, under his own conditions directly. That a direct experience with Christ did not need ordained clergy. And in his 1652, he had his own vision, his own great revelation, his own great awakening. And the Quakers were born out of this. This notion of restoring the pure church, true religion. And isn't it that every great religionist who has a revelation from God believes their revelation is taking you closer to the original God. That's part of this whole revelatory thing. My revelation gets me closer to God, then your revelation got you closer to God. Do you hear the notions of power embedded in religious practices? And if America is God's great shining example on the hill, do we not believe that power has not been embedded into American religion? So that we not only have the great crisis of the white consciousness, but we have the great crisis of the white evangelical church. Southern Baptists are railing. They have supported a man divorced more times than a bird chirps, who's had more affairs than water in the bay, who is abusive, who does not have a track of truth in him. And yet, the Southern Baptist Church, the great evangelicals, supported President Trump. I wonder what Billy Graham is thinking from the grave as his son wraps his arms around a whoring, lying, non-religious president. The great evangelical bastion of America, Billy Graham, his son, has now betrayed every theological principle that he held. Or did he? Or did his son unveil the fact that much of Western evangelical religion was never based upon relationship with God, but based upon the wrappings of trying to keep white supremacy held in tow within the Western community? Well, nonetheless, Rustin never finished his education at either school. His pacifist beliefs based in his Quakerism is listed as one problem. Others suggest that being caught in one or two homosexual relations had him removed. We don't really know, because the man was not interested in his private life being the guiding narrative of his operations. He was not interested in being fully defined by his sexuality. And yet, we are now compelled, obsessed in some ways, with trying to understand the sex lives of people as if those are the defining narratives of their intellectual ascent. Or are they ways in which we attempt to capture, cajole, and put them in holes? These are the Foucaultian questions I have. These are the questions about power and how we understand power. Now, let me jump to something that Sister Anna raised that was a part of my lecture, and that is Martin Luther King, Rustin's relationship with King. And when we talk about history, we have to talk about it from the way it was written. Historians of the Civil Rights Movement have written about this relationship in one way. It has been written about in other ways from people who view it from the notion of sexuality. I think that this is a hybrid moment. I think hearing from Rustin himself gives us insight into how we should understand the complex and yet simple relationship that he had with the religious leader of the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King. I think his description of this is spot on, because I believe that many of us give Martin Luther King too much emotional credit. Martin Luther King was a young man thrust into intellectual life at 15 years of age. His worldview was shaped early by a dominant father. Martin Luther King was then thrust in his early 20s into a world that he was never emotionally shaped for. His first, and some would think greatest love, was a young white woman. Coretta Scott was the love that was acceptable for him to have. King's world was molded by a personality in Daddy King who was not to be trifled with. And Daddy King shaped every aspect of his life, including his emotional development. Martin Luther King was protected, upper middle class, and cloistered. He had not run the streets, not been in the clubs. He had not been exposed to what one may call underground knowledge. So he comes into contact with a man who is his polar opposite, Bayard Rustin. Their interactions were going to be complicated. And one man was going to understand the other in a way that the other could not comprehend. In 1987, Rustin had an interview in which he talked about this relationship. He says unequivocally, "My being gay was not a problem for Dr. King, but a problem for the movement." And I thought this was an amazing, nuanced way of understanding it. My being gay was not a problem for Dr. King, but a problem for the movement. Why? They both had, King and Rustin had complicated sexual lives. And both their complicated sexual lives were integrated into the larger civil rights movement. Both their complicated sexual lives were weaponized by J. Edgar Hoover. Both their complicated sexual lives, if fully exposed to the church, would have been diminishing to them. And yet, the patriarchy that's embedded in Black religion as an inheritance from white supremacy would have allowed King to get away with it. Because the Black male preacher was allowed a certain freedom of hodom, if I were to use a folk term, that is male and patriarchal, that would never, and is still to this day, never allowed to be a part of the Black woman's narrative. Now, in order to understand this complicated sexual history within Black faith, people like Kelly Brown Douglas are instrumental. Black people, our religious orientation, and our conservatism are an attempt to escape the white dominant sexual narrative that's been created for us. From the moment we were put on ships and the moment we were recognized to be as bodies, chattel, and profit, sexuality within the white normative gaze was economic. Certain male slaves were breeders. They were created and set apart to sire as many children as possible, often through the raping of Black women. Yet, the white moralistic calculus could not accept within their own minds to be a party to rape. So what they had to do was create another historical narrative that made Black women sexually loose, immoral. That narrative had to be created to deal with the lust of white male slaveholders on Black female bodies. It was not the white male slaveholder's fault that he had mulatto babies. She is a sexual aberrant creature. So that Black sexuality has always been manipulated and warped within the power dynamics of white supremacy. And to this day, the Black church has tried to create moral codes to counteract that movement. So before we judge the church too harshly for its notions of sexual prudence, we've got to understand where that sexual prudence from, what its intent to counteract is, and as misshapen as it may be, it was an effort to try to gain control of the Black body and wrestle that control from the manipulation of white dominance. Am I justifying the conservative theology? It's not about justifying. That's a moralistic notion. I'm trying to explain the ethic, where it comes from, how it is to be understood. So the king did not have judgments on Rustin's sexuality because he was compromised himself, and because he was not raised in an environment where he understood the various sexualities. He had no contact with those various sexualities. Because in the Black community at that time, sexualities were subverted and subjected under the gaze, and therefore sexuality was not lived out loud in Black communities in most places. So that I agree on one end with Sister Anna, that he is not an absent historical figure simply because of his sexuality, because then we'd have to explain James Baldwin, whose sexuality is predominant. I think one of the reasons that he is not a major historical figure is because he chose to live a life behind the scenes. And does his sexuality subvert him some? Absolutely. We cannot doubt that. That's the reason Baldwin went to live in France, because his sexuality would not allow him to fully be integrated into the Black life of America outside of the intelligentsia that he was floating with. But many of your great Black poets, Langston Hughes and others, were all intertwined into the great Harlem Renaissance, which was not just a literary renaissance, but the Harlem Renaissance was a sexual renaissance. Alain Locke, the great philosopher, the sort of author of the New Negro, helps us to understand that the New Negro Renaissance was a new sexuality renaissance, and yet very classist, right? So that there are very real classist elements here, so that the ground level experience of Black people is not lived in the Harlem Renaissance. These are very educated, middle-class Black people who find some agency through the guilt of white patrons. I know I said I wasn't going to take more than a half an hour, and my Baptist inclinations are kicked in, so I'm going to end very shortly. But this conversation between King and Rustin about whether King should form a committee comes from the Reverend Dr. Thomas Kilgore. Now, I am Californian. Where is Kilgore? Where's in LA? Kilgore and King know each other from Morehouse College. Kilgore is one of the greatest preachers in American history, unknown. Rose to become the chair of the Morehouse College Board of Trustees. I was privileged to have several conversations with Thomas Kilgore. Brilliant man. Kilgore calls the committee. The committee says, not sure, but can you imagine having an entire civil rights committee of leadership called to discuss whether your sexuality is allowed in the movement? Can you imagine what that makes one feel? Eventually, it is decided that he's not good, but listen to the nuanced language. The nuanced language suggests And he says, I told King, rather than cause you a problem, and rather than you having to tell me to leave, I'll leave on my own. What kind of self-awareness is this? What kind of power is he recapturing? Well, this is where I'll close with Howard Thurman. Thurman talks to us in Jesus and the Disinherited about fear. And he says fear is born out of fear of the future. There are several forms of fear. He says, but ultimately fear is about a one-sided form of violence. When one group of people has the power to choose how the other group of people will be defined and operate, it is steeped in an attempt to rob one of their self-being, self-respect. It is an erasure of dignity. He says, then fear becomes a safety device, a way in which the oppressed surround themselves. They monitor their bodies. Fear is an everyday piece of the Black experience. I fear my 17-year-old son walking out the door because I don't know when he's going to come back. And Rustin is doing something amazing. He's also saying that fear is propagated by the white liberal. And he is suggesting that the white liberal co-opts the fear of the African American and uses that as a way to perpetuate themselves. He argues that much of the gains of the white liberal comes on the backs of the Black movement, and that many of the benefits of the Black movement are felt more by the white liberal than they are by the Black people who initiated those movements. And here in this city, oh my goodness, if we watch the boldness of the white woman as they can tell Black people what to do and how to feel and how to operate, as they can call city council meetings and verbally lynch a Black man because they don't like him or they don't think his politics are right. The power of the white woman liberal who is fighting for the rights of the poor Black man that they have never talked to is amazing and disgusting. And Rustin pointed it out in 1964. And we must be careful. We must be careful about our own meta narratives, thinking that we are in privileged positions to help other people when really we should be listening to their stories. I'm going to cut it off there because I think I've given more than enough, although I have more to give, and open ourselves up for any questions or anyone who takes issue with anything. I think, Sister Anna, you're muted, so we can't hear you. Technology.
Okay, thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Pastor Quick. I gotta add one more thing about Stanley Levinson. As I mentioned, Levinson was a money man. He dumped Bayard. Levinson was an actual communist, and a lot of the pressure and smearing from J. Edgar Hoover had to do with calling people communists. Levinson could have backed away himself, which would have been very helpful. And he didn't. I think one of the lessons from that is that no ally is indispensable. We can back off. So if you're causing problems, Pastor Quick, we're gonna have to, there's just so many issues and stories and things being brought on. I just, we have to continue this. But I'm gonna ask people, I think we can just take a 5-minute break and come back for for Professor Dummett, if that's okay with everybody. So thank you so much. And thank you for giving everybody a little taste of Vallejo. So yeah, we be right back, everybody. Ro, I took host back for a moment. Thank you so much. Wow. We're having fun. So cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's just amazing being on Zoom and everything that's been happening this year. Yeah, Pastor Quick mentioned D'Amelio. I want to thank all the scholars that have come before me, and it would not be possible to be pointing out if they had not done the research. It wouldn't be possible for me to disagree with them. And I hope that comes across. This is a wonderful book called Bayard, Rustin, Troubles I've Seen. It was written by an African-American journalist in the 70s. I believe Rustin was still alive while he wrote it. Journalists write such great biographies because they tell stories, and there's great stories in that. There is also I Must Resist, Bayard Rustin's letters. One of the things, Time on Two Crosses, his writing, Bayard was a wonderful writer. One of the things I'm doing is writing a comic book about Bayard in the vein of March by Congressman John Lewis. There's just amazing dialogue, and it's just so, there is never enough time to do anything, to say everything that could be said. One of the things is called 22 Days on a Chain Gang, and I can't find it. I mean, Rustin pretty much managed to make friends with everybody on the chain gang. So, okay, I think everybody is back. I want to give the background of how I came about bringing in the next presenter. Several years ago, I became interested in sign language as a political issue on a very deep level of people being able to have full participation and engagement in society. I did a lot of researching and reaching out. Not everybody may be aware that autism is a word. It's again talking about there's hearing people coming into deaf spaces, and what I am doing is advocating for ASL. I am advocating for sign language. I advocate for access and participation. I don't advocate for deaf people. And, in the same way, like I've been offered to do events at places that are not wheelchair accessible, and I don't do them. When I have in-person events, I try to make sure that there are chairs that will be comfortable for people of all sizes. So what I've done in Vallejo is arrange town hall meetings with Hakeem Brown and deaf community members here in Vallejo. I was able to help advocate to have past community forums and candidate forums sign language interpreted, including at the Community Democratic Club. Another thing that I was working on with Councilmember Brown before COVID was supporting the ASL programs at the community college here to support students that are in those programs and to present ASL interpretation as a career in any career events here. So that's something that has been happening. And Bayard Rustin Symposium, as I've said, is an event for work. It's to look forward to figure out what we can be doing. And so as I've learned more about sign language, I have learned about Black Sign Language, African American Sign Language, and the importance of those issues. So, the hope is for all of us, young people and everybody, to learn more about sign language and the importance of full inclusion and participation for everyone. So I am very thrilled and honored that Professor Roxanne Dummett is here with us today. She's an ASL lecturer and assistant professor at George Mason University and was an ASL adjunct at Northern Virginia Community College. And she has earned BA and MA for Deaf Studies from Gallaudet University. And she's also a Black American Sign Language researcher, presenter, and narrator. You can find her work in The Hidden Treasure of Black ASL, and you can find more work about Black ASL on in the New York Times, in YouTube, and there is now a young lady who is the fourth generation deaf person in her family using Black ASL, and she does presentations with her grandfather on TikTok. So I just want to thank very much Twitter for educating me. And so I look forward to learning and contributing. So I am introduced Professor Roxanne Dummett. Oh. Oh, Ro, she needs, Oh, we need to make, oh my gosh, okay. Sorry, everybody. Yes, I will make, yeah, I'll make you co-host, Professor. Yeah, I just made you the host. I just, and, oh, shoot. Professor Dummett, can you unmute the interpreters? Okay, I think we're all, can people try and unmute? Yeah, okay. Okay, I think we good? Okay. I'm sorry, everybody.
Can everyone see? Good.
Yes, yes. Yes, we can hear on, yes. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I need the ability to share my PowerPoint. I
Okay.
guess I need to take over again.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
I'm disabled, right? I'm disabled in this right now. Oh, okay, I got it. I got it.
Got it. Okay.
Good. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Perfect. Everyone ready? So I want to explain through the interpreter. If anything is not clear, someone let me know, okay? Perfect. I want to say welcome to everyone and allowing me to be here today for the Black ASL part, ASL history. And I just want to give a brief description of who I am. I'm from New York City, grew up in New York. When I went to Gallaudet University, I graduated there. I had an interest in finding out about Black ASL, and I was like, there's Black ASL? And I was really surprised by that and exactly what that meant. So how it affected and how it was used by Black children, I was really surprised to know that there was not a lot of knowledge and a lot of information about that. So I did a lot of research and going back in history and finding out more about Black ASL. And also seeing how it affected people. Exactly what that meant. So how it affected and how it was used by Black children, I was really surprised to know. Can we hold for a minute? A lot of knowledge and a lot of information about that.
Yeah.
I'm getting feedback. I did a lot of research and going back in history and finding out
Yeah,
more
I'm trying to.
Black ASL. Like I've talked already, and now I'm hearing myself again, delayed. Okay, go ahead. Yes. The Hidden Treasure of Black ASL, Its History and Structure. And from 2011, this was printed by Gallaudet University. I wanted to look at this part of the Hidden Treasure of Black ASL. And this really explains it in depth, this book. Can everyone see that? And this is part of what I want to cover that's from the book. So people often generalize the deaf community. And what I've noticed is when they're talking about ASL in the deaf community, I don't think they know yet the research that there hasn't been enough research done yet. Because ASL in the deaf community, there's so many variations within our community and our language. And many people have said, what is that? And how is it different? So we can identify a few differences here. A lot of it has not been done yet. Can you go back just a little? So you can have the many questions of what, how, different, and what we can see in that difference. So that is a common question. People ask, how is it different? And a lot of work and research has not been done yet on this topic. And so we needed to find a place where we can start. Does Black ASL exist? Yes, it does. And we have Black ASL. But we don't have a large portion of understanding just yet. The basic question in the part of the project is Black ASL and analyzing what it means and what it involves. What are the features of the variety of American Sign Language that people call Black ASL? And what does that look like? There are many anecdotal reports about its existence. There has been evidence of it, so it's very clear that it exists. Like the difference in daily language, like shoes, how it's signed basically. So there's one difference on how Black and general ASL, the difference in signing the simple word of shoes. And you know about Ebonics in Black English. It's parallel, Black English, Black ASL. So when I started researching this, I was pretty shocked about the difference, the separation in Black, deaf, and Black in general. You don't learn this in school. You learn it as a person in color who is deaf. Because most of the time, many people ignore that part. You can show the verb be, to be, like in the evening, break the night. It's the same, how it applies the same across both languages. So to speak perfect English or proper English, you see how it's structured. And you can see the difference here in these two comparisons. She's the first one to start us off. She is first one started us off. Pretty basic. Other questions that come up about culture and family, gatherings, like being a part of a club, and different traumas. So it's, oh, get out of here. So it's different. You can see what their language looks like and how the Black ASL looks, and the differences that come up. When you use the method of vernacular in American language, American English, and this has been developed over many, many years. So it's been analyzed. And you can see African-American vernacular in English. And the morphology, syntax, lexicons. And that's all been researched in the African-American vernacular of English. So there's also in speech, how it sounds. You can see examples here. When you drop certain parts of the word, post to post, wasp, was, gift. You can note the differences here and the theme of it and how it's used in English and what is left out, what is dropped off from the words. And that is where you first learn the differences is in school and how to pronounce these words and how they sound. So the meaning of the word and where it comes from and how the words are put together, the linguistics, the morphemes, and the complete meaning of the words. You can see example here, the soup has been cooked for a long time. The soup been cooked. It's been shortened. Just so you can become familiar with the differences that are noted in African-American vernacular. So in Black English is also thought of as negative. And so it's a double negativity when thinking about the African-American vernacular of English. The syntax, the arrangement of words, lexicon, a stock of words and expressions. Sedity. You can picture this? Can you picture this in ASL? If you understand the English meaning? We're going to find out later about this. So Black talk. How Black people tend to talk. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Just more colorful language. And here's some other examples of Black English. Corey Jesus didn't have no car. You better go get that fool. One moment. Okay. Now we are going to see how this looks in ASL. And I want to have a discussion about this. This is the focus of our project. And the point of how this has developed and what we can collect from the evidence that we have found. And we can figure out our own needs and communicate in two different separate communities. And what we have figured out and what it's led to the possibilities of how the impact of this has happened over time. Do you think that all languages vary and how they vary? Do you think of them as regional, social variations? Do you think it's all separate around the world? And you can see this, read it in the book by Rickford, Factors in the Development of Language Varieties. So both factual and geographical, and how some languages are more isolated, and how the languages have been kept separate. And boundaries have affected also the language and the areas that these languages have come from. Also, it's affected by where people live and where they have developed. Other social areas such as age, gender, background, ethnicity, and identity. Resources that are found, the materials that are available to the people, that also has a play in people's language. We group people, and we went around 6 different states and 17 different schools. And we wanted to see the oldest of these situations that we could research and find more history on, depending on their region, where they're located, how they were nurtured, the background of them, and how we can visit. We tried to go to visit them and how the languages are used. In Virginia, in North Carolina, in LA, and Louisiana, in Texas, Arkansas, there's a deaf school there. In Alabama. And so also their former names, which were thought of as negative. That was during a time when the phrases of colored, the term colored was used for describing African Americans. At the blind schools, the mainstream schools. All of this from the list you see here in my PowerPoint. Times have changed along with the languages. Miller versus DC Public Schools. You can research, find out what happened here. It was a mother and her daughter at the school in DC that the child was attending. And to the point, the white children's parents didn't like the idea of a Black person and their child coming to school with their children. They were totally against that. White parents complained that they didn't want this child with their children. And they lived in a richer area of DC than the child was from. And so that child had to take public transportation to get to the school and was forced to go there in Bear being there with these children. And there was an uproar. And they filed charges against having that child go to that same school. But this was before 1964. But there was a fight. They fought and fought and fought, and finally that child was able to go back to their school. Yes, access. Is somebody not getting full access? I think, can everyone hear me? The interpreter voicing? Hello, everyone. I'm hearing nothing. Hello? Can someone just voice and let me know you can hear me, please? Yes, hear you perfectly. Somebody just responded. Okay. The voicing interpreter can't hear anyone, and I can't see your panels. Great. Good. Okay. From the interpreter, I can't see or hear other people, so I don't know. But someone responded in the chat, they can hear me perfectly, so please go on. Okay. Back to Roxanne Dummett. Does anyone need me to go back and to review anything, or are we all up to where we are in this PowerPoint? Oh. So remember that I'm deaf. I have an interpreter voicing for me.
Yeah, I'm,
I can hear now.
yeah, interpreters, okay, I just unmuted, I believe the interpreters are unmuted now.
I'm unmuted now.
Blaine is going to take over now, the other interpreter.
Okay, thank you.
We're all able to hear. The presentation has been going perfect.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna make,
Blaine, can you be seen? Is your camera on?
My camera is disabled.
Oh,
My mic is working, obviously.
yes.
And I just wanted to know if you needed support in relief. But you're doing excellent. If you want to keep on that roll.
Okay, I'll keep going.
Just for simplicity, I don't know, because
Can someone on my camera again, please?
we don't have people's cameras undone.
Blaine, can you sign to our speaker that my camera is off?
she can't see me either. I can't sign it. My video is disabled as well.
Okay.
But just continue, I guess, for simplicity's sake.
But she has stopped. I wanted to let her to know to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the,
If you silence your phone,
okay,
I can through video.
okay, now, okay, we should, okay, everybody's able to unmute themselves and start their videos. Does that?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had the same problem with my camera. When I turned my screen off, I couldn't get back on. But then after I waited for a bit, it worked again.
Can you ask Roxanne if she can still PowerPoint?
I think she's got it now.
Okay.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure we're all on.
Thank you, everybody.
So that Miller versus DC Public Schools, just to get that little girl back to her school. Remember the white parents were all upset. They wanted to keep the department separate. I understand, yes, in the same school, but they wanted to keep the children separate. It was called Separate but Equal. And in that department that they had there, They wanted to keep the children separate, the white children to stay with theirs own and the black child separate from the rest. You can see here in the picture, these are the parents of the child. This happened in 1954. This was Maryland. They would send their children, and their teacher was a white teacher. So the black children were educated by white teachers. Their teachers did not reflect them. So you can see here again a white teacher. And black teachers were at that time not allowed to become teachers in the schools for the deaf, the black schools, because there were so few as well, those that could become teachers. You can see here a picture of former teachers who taught at the school in Maryland, the deaf school. I think some have passed on. This is a plaque in honor of the Kendall School Division 2. So now you can see the geographic factors that impacted the formation of Black ASL. And of course, the language development, that was also kept separate as far as the white deaf students and the black deaf students. So they didn't have the opportunity to see how their use of each other's language. And so schools for black deaf children were physically isolated and separated. Some were on the same level. Some were at the school, were in different locations to keep them from socializing with each other. You have here, all of the students are black here at the Kansas School for the Deaf. And this is a schedule of the black and white deaf schools founded and desegregated. You can see the first column, second row, excuse me, how it was set up for white students. And the third column for black students during the same year, but you can see the fourth column, how it was separated, and then they were mainstream in 1958. Meaning after 1 year, they were separated and finally put back together again in the same class in 1958. Excuse me, 1948. Do you see? Do you see the last row, the last row? In Louisiana, all the schools. So you see why? How it was set up in 1852, excuse me, excuse the interpreter, 1852. So they didn't have a school for black children for so many years. They had deaf schools for white children, but none for black children. And what were the black children doing? They were left to their own at home. There was no formal education there until they set it up for black children. But before that time, there was no school or formal education for black deaf students until they were finally mainstreamed, but still it was late. So although they were mainstream, they were still kept separate at the school. And that was one of the worst experiences for these students because they were deprived of their educational rights. Their opportunity had been taken away. So you see that how it happened in Louisiana. In that time, it was just awful. The schools, the teachers did nothing to educate the Black deaf. Just ignored them, left them to stay at home. And these Black deaf children received nothing because they were looked at as having no worth, no funding. And there's a chart that shows how many years until there was a school set up. So again, there was a school set up for white deaf children, but not for Black deaf children. There's a chart that shows when a school was finally set up. So when I look at the different programs for Black deaf children, it's funny that for children for the best education, they still looked at ASL as not equal to learning a language or to learning English. And so they disregarded the children that needed to learn ASL because they were deaf. So voicing from the interpreter, her panel is a little bit freezing up. Your panel is freezing up a little for me. So I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna stop you if you don't mind, stop you to go back. Okay, go ahead. Yes, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Let me know what you need.
Okay. Oh, I'm fine, go ahead. The Texas school was very special. They had what they called the Asylum for Deaf and Dumb Blind Colored Youth in Austin, Texas. This is where children were thrown in without any kind of interpreter or interpretation or understanding. And they all just thought that as a general school for the deaf, for the colored deaf. And you have here the school, Texas Blind, Deaf, and Orphan School, BDO, and their staff. This was a man who was a former slave and worked at BDO and achieved a higher role at the school. Otis Massey, who himself was deaf and became a teacher. That was rare back in that time. Here's a picture of the white teachers. In Virginia, William Ritter, he earned money to bring up the education for schools for Black deaf. And he struggled and struggled for 9 years until he can achieve that goal for providing an educational system for Black deaf. A mother approached him one time about her daughter and getting an education and said that she was willing to wash clothes and do whatever she could to help in achieving that goal. And so her daughter also washed clothes for the family. But it was burned down by a fire, the Arkansas school, deaf mute school. This is Madison Street School. So I'm going to explain a little bit how we collected the research on how we had 2 different systems of sign language, ASL and Black ASL. We were very adamant about traveling and gaining more insight and information. And the age of the schools where we were trying to, that were part of our study. And also the age groups where we were questioning and surveying former students. And their level and how they learned ASL. And so there were various groups, 6 different groups in 6 different states. And here's what we investigated. And I have some questions for the group. Are you hearing? Are you deaf? Your teachers? What was the process you went through? Did you go to oral school or full inclusion or ASL? Did you sign at home differently than you did at school, or did you sign the same? And did you have focus? I wanted to focus on some questions. Where did you go to school? Where and when did you learn to sign? Did you go to school with Black students only? Were your teachers Black or white? Were your teachers hearing or deaf? Did your teachers sign? Did they sign ASL? What language did they use? Did you have Black teachers that signed, or did you have white teachers? And so some of the other questions. The differences between Black and white sign language, and how did they vary in differences or similarities? Can you think of specifics that make the languages between Black and white different? Are there older signs that you do not see much anymore? Do you sign differently with Black people than with white people? If so, how and why? And I did see that a lot between the two groups. So do you sign specifically a certain way because of the situation? Or do you use language, your everyday casual language? Do you sign differently depending on the situation? For example, a formal situation compared to an informal situation? If so, how? And so those were examples of some questions that we added to our research and also show the differences. During a free conversation, when you're chatting along with friends or family, what language do you use? How do you use the language? Meaning, what specifics are involved when you're communicating? We asked if white educators were better than Black educators. Are Black signers different from white signing based on style, attitude, and culture? Kind of like when you're speaking in English and you note an accent, how does it sound different, or how does it function different when you're sharing a language? Is there power? Yes, there's power in expression and movement. You sign bigger depending on the situation. There's a rhythm. There's a rhythm to signing, a style. And there are different styles also involving culture and emotion. And it becomes very colorful. For white signers that sign very monotonic, very, very flat, lacking in emotion. And not so much fun to watch. Some ASL can be snobbish. Some can be polite and courteous. So now Black ASL, in comparison to white language. So when I asked these questions at a school where the students were differentiated between race, the white language they thought of as better, whereas the Black language and expression, I got a different experience and a different reply from that side. It's cleaner, it's better, it's advanced when we're talking about white language, more vocabulary, complexity, resourceful, abstract. And that was one group's view. And on Black language, this is the view of those who thought about Black language, what they thought about Black language. Street thuggish, inferior, more gestural, negative, inappropriate, emotive, lacking in information. And that's what really shocked me. And I was like, what? Is that your view on Black language? Wow. And it really gave me pause for thought. So the separate schools, when I went to a mainstream school where there was mostly white, they tended to tease and speak less of Black language. And they saw it as something to set aside, not use, not become involved with. And that was it. Wow. And when I brought this up with Black children, they were proud of their language. They were proud of themselves. Remember the comment that was made earlier today about the child who was the girl that was a 4th generation Black deaf? So while generationally, she didn't have that effect of being, having the effect of having to hear these negatives about white language. So on this, the doll test, the mentality of a test that was parallel, the white doll and the Black doll. Psychologists asked the children, which doll did you think was better, the white doll or the Black doll? And of course, they all picked the white doll in ASL. This was done in ASL. And why was the white one more advanced? Because it's clean, it's light. Then conceptually, it was all in concept and in comparison to the Black doll. So the different view from each group, you can see a list here. Because their experiences were separate, they valued it differently. They valued each one differently. So this is the girl who is the 4th generation Black deaf. And her grandmother, grandfather, grandparents, she graduated from BDO, that Black deaf school in Texas. And she showed her use of language on TikTok. And people were, they were kind of surprised to see, oh, there's Black ASL. And you can see, even watching her, how the language developed differently than white ASL. Here we have Dr. Carolyn McCaskill. She's from Arkansas School for the Deaf. She's now a PhD at Gallaudet University, instructor. And what she has noticed through her own teachings about the difference between Black Sign Language and White Sign Language. And she was mainstreamed at her school partially. And she had questions about what the other white students were signing. She thought it was strange. And that people would make fun and tease her about her use of language. So some of you may know, here she is again with her deaf great-grandfather. So I'm going to stop it here. Linguistics and the features of this, we analyze 8 different languages. In ASL and in Black Sign Language, the morphology, there are different rules of hand shape, expression, facial gestures, facial expression. And where you can see what's different between Black Sign Language and White Sign Language. We both use 2 hands, both hands in communicating. You can see here the size and signing space, how much space is used. The influence of AAVE, African American Vernacular English. The words or motion that you see on the mouth. So in Black Sign Language, it tends to be a little repetitive and structured than in White ASL. Froze. Okay. You can see the difference here. You can find out here some of the motions on the mouth that aid in signing. Sometimes it's confusing. So, and many Black people, they sign bigger, taking up more space than white people who sign in a smaller spatial area. And there can be some repetitiveness. So I have, my time has just gone away. I have more things I could show. But there's a lot of information and resources that are available. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not muted. Oh, thank you so much, Professor Dummett. I'm just very, very moved and pleased that you were able to join us. And it is just about, I just try and think a lot like, what would Bayard Rustin do? And I think Bayard Rustin would be working to have full inclusion and participation from everyone. And, I'm just very grateful to everyone that has been here, to this community.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we are going to have some music. Do people feel like they want to just take a minute, or should we go into music? How's everybody doing? Danette Mitchell, thank you so much for being here. Sister Carolyn, we have Bawapa, Danita, and I want to give just huge thanks to DJ Rowe, who is the best ever. Everybody on Facebook, I'm trying to keep track of where you are at too. Thank you. And this will be on Facebook. The video will be on Facebook, and I will also download it and put it up on the Rustin Symposium YouTube channel. So, there's just so much going on, and I'm just very grateful. Blackberri, you ready for me to give you an introduction?
Sure.
Okay. So Bayard Rustin, and again, we never get to everything, just had a beautiful voice, and music was always part of his presentations. So I really wanted, I've been trying to have music at the symposium for a while, and I'm delighted that we are able to do that. And let me give you a little bit of background. I'm just, I mean, I'm honored to have everybody that's here is special and amazing, but Blackberry's singer is a hero and a warrior. I'm very honored and moved that Blackberry can be here. I've known him for several years and not been able to work with them. And a little background, Blackberry was born in 1945 in Buffalo, New York. He's performed music and appeared in several films, including Marlon Riggs' Tongues Untied, No Regret, Anthem, Affirmations, and Black Is, Black Ain't. Blackberry's first album, Blackberry and Friends, was released in 1981, featuring the classical award-winning song, Eat the Rich. Blackberry has been an educator, caregiver, advocate, counselor on behalf of HIV/AIDS. He has performed at Pride and just been all over the place. And I am just thrilled that he can be here today. So, Mr. Blackberry singer, take us off.
Actually, it's just Blackberry.
I'm sorry.
I had to use singer because Facebook wanted 2 names.
Oh, okay, Blackberry.
You hear the guitar. Can you hear the guitar?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
My people stole from Africa and they never know what they were born here for till they put them on the auction stand, made them slaves and made them work this land. We come a long way, we still got a long way to go. Enjoying my life, but I still got a hard road to hoe. Got a hard road. We come a long way, we still got a long way to go. Yes, we do. Enjoying my life, but I still got a hard road. And some of my folks, they were Indian who married, made them next of kin. And we were laced with the European that gave us many color skins. We come a long way, we still got a long way to go. Got a long road, we come a long way, we still got a long way to go. We got a hard road to hoe now. My people gave this country lots of things. Gave us songs and war, gave us songs to sing, gave us teachers and scientists, inventors too. I can name the contributions for a year or two. We come a long way, we still got a long way to go. Got a long way, enjoying my life. song called A Hard Road to Hoe. Next one I'd like to do is a song from a film. It's called Beautiful Black Man. Beautiful Black Man was the song before the film. The film was actually written around the song, and it was the idea of as a children. So, Beautiful Black Man. Beautiful black man, I'm just like you. You know I face discrimination too. Got here about 10, and when I walked in this place, hardly nobody here would look me in the face. Such a beautiful black man, but somehow you've been made to feel that your beauty is not real. Beautiful black man, you walk with your head bending low. Don't you do that no more. Beautiful black man, if they ask for ID, did they want to with pictures, or did they want 3? I know it's hard. Sometimes we must just walk away and shake our heads in disgust. You're such a beautiful black man, but somehow you've been made to feel that your beauty is not real. Beautiful black man, don't walk with your head bending low. Come on, don't you do that no more. I saw you cruise that white guy over there, one with the wavy hair. Yeah, I did it too. I didn't get through. See, I got here before you. It's not that you're ugly, no. You see, he just might, I might have a problem, but he may never ever notice you. Oh, me for that back too. You're such a beautiful black man. Somehow you've been made to feel that you're beautiful, not real. Beautiful black man. Come on, put a smile on your face. Be proud of your race. Come on, beautiful black man. I am glad you look my way. Let's go home together. What more can I say? I know it's hard, but sometimes we must. You say you don't see what I see in you. Well, I see the beauty. I wish that you knew. You're such a beautiful black man. Somehow you've been made to feel that your beauty not real. Beautiful, beautiful black man. Come on, put a smile on your face. Be proud of your race. Come on, be proud of it now. Come on, be proud of it now. Come on, be proud, be proud, be proud, be proud of it, proud of it, proud of it. Say, come on, be proud. Come on, be proud, be proud, be proud, be proud, be proud. This song's actually a song about discrimination in the, well, I guess you could say white gay clubs. Happened to me in Milwaukee. That I happened to meet this person that I wrote the song about. And I'm gonna close out with one more song. Is that I have time for one more?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Saying, oh, people, don't give up. I know that things are tough. I know the going can get rough sometimes. Oh, people, don't give up. The victory will be yours one day. Well, I'm talking to the people of decolonized. Keep your ears wide open, keep your eye on the prize. If the 1% don't act, that's when you compromise. Victory will be yours one day. Sing it with me, oh people, don't give up. I know that things are tough. I know the long we can get rough sometimes. Oh, people, don't give up. The victory will be yours one day. Well, I'm talking to the people of all Black Lives Matter. Things will get much more together. things will get much more bad. We stand up and fight for all the black blood that's splattered. The victory will be yours one day. Bring it with me, oh people. Don't give up. I know that things are tough. I know going can get rough sometimes. Oh, people, don't give up. The victory will be yours one day. Well, I'm talking to the people who struggle everywhere. You don't ever win if you don't ever dare. If you're feeling ripped off and you want your fair share, then victory will be yours one day. Sing it with me, oh people, don't give up. I know that things are tough. I know the going can get rough down. Oh, people, don't give up. The victory will be yours. Victory will be yours. Victory will be yours. Victory will be yours. Victory will be yours one day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bravo. Everybody wants to, yeah, we do. Okay, my DJ's on here, my other one, Ro, we got to get Blackberry on the show. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. This was just, yes, Blackberry. People want to contribute directly to Blackberry. His Venmo is in the chat and Facebook. It's also on the comments. Whoa. Okay, this concludes like the planned parts of the Bayard Rustin Symposium. So I want to open it up again. I mean, I really have appreciated, we've gotten comments and notes here. I feel like people have been really present, and it's just been a really interesting year with Zoom. And I'm very happy that we can continue to do this. And I want to thank NAACP Vallejo branch. You've been very, very supportive. Don't know where Mr. Jackson is, but Danette Mitchell, and the sisters that are here, Blackberri, Professor Dummett, and I'm so happy that my brother and my dad could be here. And yeah, New Pacific Studio has a huge support to me. And yeah, so I just would like to open it up to see if there's comments from people. We've had a lot going on. We can go ahead and Facebook, if you want to say anything. Miss Thelma, one of our sponsors, Thelma's African Connection. NAACP Vallejo branch is one of the oldest NAACPs in the country. They are extremely active. One of the things we're really doing with the Bayard Rustin Symposium is making connections, letting people know what's going on. So I encourage people to get involved with the NAACP in Vallejo or anywhere. Does anybody else have? Oh, and okay, Tuesday nights is the Spectrum open mic, LGBT open mic. Blackberry is a big part of that.
One of the founders.
Yes, one of the founders, along with kinfolks from Spectrum Media. It's another thing going on. I want to thank Vallejo Naval and Historical Museum. We've had the symposium every year. We were not able to this year, but they've been big supporters, made it possible. I'm doing a benefit for them next month. Does anybody have any questions or want to chime in, or feel free to unmute. NAACP, Blackberry, DJ Rowe. Oh, okay, man. So we can, Pastor Quick needed to go along to another meeting, but all of this material will be available on Facebook. I'll download it and put it up on YouTube, along with information for Professor Dummett's work. I was so happy that she got to show Nakia on there. And, you know, this is just about talking to each other, carrying on heritage. And yeah, Bayard Rustin Symposium 2021. We did it. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you who presented. I really enjoyed it, and it was really enlightening. And thank you to the interpreter. You were very, very committed there. It's very long, but you did an excellent job, and I thank you. But this was wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep the Zoom room open for a minute or so, but you know, feel free to you know move along, enjoy this afternoon. You can
Well,
yeah.
I'm off to bed.
Okay. Thank you, Blackberry. You'll be hearing from me.
Okay.
Okay. Good
Thank
night.
you for the invite.
Bye.
Thank you everyone who participated in this, and it was really it was very educational for me too. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about Byron, but I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So always getting more information is always, I love that.
Seriously. Absolutely.
I love it.
Lifelong. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Ciao, everyone.
Okay, ciao. Sean, I'm pleased I got to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, everybody, I think we are concluding, and thank you. You know, you can always reach the Bayard Rustin Symposium, and we'll be back next year in person.